All right, we are talking with Dave Hawes. He is the pastor of Godwin Heights Baptist Church in Lumberton, North Carolina. Dave has been through a couple of hurricanes and disasters, and he knows what they are like. And now he helps other churches and areas get through them too. So, Dave, first of all, thank you very much for talking to our folks tonight. And as a way of a brief introduction, tell the folks the numerous various hurricanes you've been through and what kind of work you also do now for Cooperative Baptist in North Carolina.
Okay. First, thank you, Stuart, for the invitation. Glad and honored to be able to do so. I got into disaster response in 2016 when I was, huh, Stuart and I were in our D-Min program together, and I was looking for a way, praying for a way really for my church to get active out into the community. So you might say it was my fault. But in October of 2016, Hurricane Matthew struck Lumberton. It pretty much hit us and us only. As we were watching its track, it was making its way up uh, toward Wilmington, and they were saying if you live on the coast, come in about 80 miles or so, and you should be okay. We're at 79 miles, and it made a beeline for us. In addition to my work as a pastor, I'm also an EMT and chaplain for our local rescue squad, Lumberton Rescue. And so I was on the front end of that. We knew it was bad when on when we were responding, and this little black SUV pulls up, and this short statured man hops out, and it is none other than Jim Cantori. So we knew we were going to be in for a rough one. But Hurricane Matthew hit us and hit us pretty hard. Our church was fine. I had a couple of folks in my congregation who lost everything. Their homes were flooded with about 6 feet or 7 feet of water, and so they lost a good bit. As is the case often with storms, the lower income folks that were in some of the lower lying areas were more significantly impacted. Whole neighborhoods were uh, were wiped out. We opened our doors to a number of relief agencies that came in to help, and they stayed with us and did some work. And then we were still in the recovery stage when Hurricane Florence came and hit us, but it also hit a larger swath of eastern part of North Carolina. So the resources that had descended just on us, primarily after Matthew, were spread out further among more communities and more people. And so we're still in the rebuilding stages of that. And then obviously we had the whole universe went through COVID. And so that's a whole different kind of storm. But some of the lessons learned from hurricanes help to process and to work through that. For the last several years, I have been the volunteer disaster response coordinator for CBF Global in North Carolina. So technically, I liaise between CBF Global's disaster response and CBF North Carolina and their response on a volunteer basis. I'm not a paid staff person to do so, but I have taken my experience with these storms and have used that to help others. We went to the western part of the state when Canton in that area was flooded a couple of years ago. That started our vision for the muck out buckets. And while we did a bucket brigade day that Stuart joined us on, and we did about 250 buckets or so that we were able to pass out there. Speaking with one of the pastors that was affected, Court Green at Canton First Baptist, he had the idea for some totes because folks were losing their livelihoods. They were having to clean out everything. And so he was asked, folks were wanting a place to put mementos and special items that they held. And so we were able to provide those for them to keep things in while they were having to clear out everything else. So that's what we've done there. At the last, not this most recent annual gathering, but the year before, last year's actually, let me back up. Uh, 3 annual gatherings ago, we announced an offering for disaster response, and we a significant offering came in that was emphasized for the offering for that annual gathering. And at the next annual gathering, we took a chunk of that money and put together 201 buckets, which I took 100 with me back down to Lumberton. We put 50 of them at Temple Baptist in Raleigh and another 50 at Trinity Baptist in Raleigh to kind of stage them along the I-95 corridor, thinking if we needed to move them east, they're not on the coast, but they're close enough that we can move them. And if we have another canton, we can easily move them west. Little did we know that we would need a lot more than that. And to this date, there are about 895 buckets that have been distributed or built and distributed to this weather event, Helene. And we have about another two or 300 that are in the queue that'll be coming along either in the next couple of weeks or maybe even into the new year. So that's what we've been a part of, what I've been honored to do to help impacted communities take the lessons that we learned, recognizing that every storm is different and the response needs to be tailored to that specific storm. But valuable experience that I'm trying to put to use and help others.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. We have been the recipient of your work because the shower trailer that I can see out my window, Dave and his other staff person, Reverend Leslie Sessoms at Godwin Heights, and also the pastor of First Baptist Lumberton, they were the ones who drove this trailer from Robeson County and helped us set it up and get it ready. And all of I don't know what the total would be now, probably over 500, I would say. People in our community, mostly strangers we didn't know, have gotten hot showers because of Dave helping to coordinate that. So it's like Jesus said in Matthew 25, when I had lost power and water for 2 weeks and needed a hot shower, you invited me in. And whatever showers you gave to the least of these brothers of mine, you've done for me. So thank you, Dave, for that work. And we look ahead and we'll probably be involved in some of those bucket brigades as we move on to the cleaning stages. So I've got some questions for you, and I will admit in my first question that this is not an event that Western North Carolina is used to. So if I ask a question, you are free to say, that's a dumb question. Here's what you should be asking. And I'll say, okay, no problem. Since we just have not experienced a kind of hurricane or natural disaster like this before, can you walk us through what the weeks are like, the stages are like, short term, middle term, long term? What does it feel like and look like for our community?
Okay. To do that, I'm going to pull up a graphic real quick and try to share that with you. So I'm going to try to, okay, it's asking permission. I should have given this permission earlier. But we'll get this taken care of.
If I had to guess, it feels like we are concluding the short term of the disaster, kind of making sure people have houses or checking on people, that immediate kind of food and water need. And it feels like now we're moving in kind of a middle term. That's just my guess.
Hmm. Yeah. Can you see
Yep.
that right there, that graphic
Hmm.
right there? You're probably seeing my whole screen right now, though, right? Okay.
Yeah, we're seeing your folder of pictures, and now that chart is expanded.
Okay, good deal. Okay, so this was called the disaster scale, the path basically of a disaster. And so you remember the warning, the pre-disaster stuff, the warning, well, it's not going to be that bad. Um, Following that through, and then the actual threat of the disaster, then it came through, and here was its impact. You're watching the emotional lows and the emotional highs here. This was a pretty depressing valley. Not to get ahead of ourselves, but you'll see that these valleys are lower along the way. To me, this looks a lot like when I go backpacking and I've got my guidebook in front of me and I'm like looking at this going, oh my goodness, I've got this great big up that I got to do. And then I got a great big down and a little up and a big down. Um, but no views, no pleasant mountain views on this one. But here's your impact. And for the last little bit, we've been climbing this. It's been great. People have come together. We've seen communities come together. We've seen relief organizations come in. We've made some new friends. We've done some good stuff. We've given 500 showers. We're climbing this mountain, climbing this mountain. We get to this peak and we're like, man, we've got a long road ahead of us, but we feel that we can do this. This is really good. Then a little bit of time happens and it starts to go down. And then it crashes precipitously after this honeymoon period where folks might start to get a little irritated with each other. This is taking longer. This is harder. I'm tired. I've been working 7 days a week doing this work. And while I'm seeing some progress, this is just way bigger than me. And you get disillusioned. Um, and then there's some trigger event, or there's these trigger events down in the valleys that are like maybe it's another storm, or maybe um, something happens along the way that just re-emphasizes the depth of need and depth of work that's going on. And then you climb out of that a little bit and you sink back down, you climb out, and then a little bit of disillusionment through here. And then the anniversary, or like 6 months later or a year later, because this is a long slog. People have said this is not a marathon. I mean, not a sprint, but a marathon. And I'm looking at this, and as you said, Stuart, this is not something that Western North Carolina anticipates. I've seen images online of showing the storm's size from satellite in comparison with what Hurricane Katrina did to New Orleans a number of years ago now, and how much bigger and more powerful this was. And we're near the coast. We're, like I said, we're about 79 miles inland, and so we're used to getting something. Florida is used to getting something, but there's a difference with what the mountain experience. My in-laws live in Spruce Pine, and while they've had some snows that have been debilitating, and they've had some flooding of the rivers and stuff like that, and they've had some major washouts where driveways have been gutted, or creeks have risen enough to destroy some of the um, bridges to people's homes. Not on this scale, not this wide of a swath of impact. And one of the things I mentioned earlier is that every storm is different, and this is most definitely a different kind of storm that we haven't experienced before, that y'all haven't experienced before. And so facing that and working through that is going to be difficult. It's one thing to have a flat area down here in Lumberton. Yes, we lost some bridges, we lost some roads and stuff, but when we lost those, we were able to put that back together pretty quickly. But in the mountains, you've got to rebuild the mountain. You've got to bring in rock. You've got to bring in um, dirt. You've got to pack that in. You've got to make sure it's going to withstand the weight. You got to make sure that it's not going to be susceptible to a mudslide. And then you can start building some road. It just takes a lot longer. And the way the terrain is, you can't just bring in resources readily or easily. It's much more difficult. And so you look at the anniversary. It's not as your lowest low, but it can be depressing, much like a death. Anniversary can be, while not as hard as the initial, but anniversaries are difficult. Now years later they might be, and those themselves might be triggering. We have when hurricanes are tracked and are looking to come our way, we have my community has a very real sense of PTSD. We feel in our bones the agony, the stress of, oh no, not again. Um, we just had what Hurricane Debbie came through and hit us moderately. A number of the folks that had been impacted before, there was water in their yards. but it didn't come up nearly as high. It didn't come into their homes, but it was another event that we were preparing for. We didn't know what exactly it was going to do. But it was triggering for us to go through and to relive. Here we go again. We were on standby at the rescue squad listening up. We didn't know what the storm was going to do. It was just difficult. And but I will say this, having gone through, while I can't empathize exactly or understand exactly where you are because your journey is different from mine because your storm is different, I do empathize in the fact that I've been in a community that's been shattered twice by this kind of thing. And so we stand with you. We stand ready to help. But again, as you're working back through this chart, you see you're coming up. It looks working through grief, coming to terms with what the new normal looks like, and you get setbacks along the way where some problem happens, or it just takes some time to climb out of it. And then you do notice that eventually you do get up to even slightly higher in your reconstruction period from where you were pre-disaster, that you've built this, that life does go on, that we can continue, that it'll be a new normal, a very different kind of normal, um, but it'll be that, but that life does go on, and you're ready to handle what comes what comes ahead. But again, that's roughly the stages or the path that a disaster impacts on a community. Now, as far as CBF's model goes, we have let me show you this screen here. This is CBF's disaster response model. Readiness, which is when we prepare before a storm comes, where we're looking at what kind of things do I need in my home? What kind of things do our churches need to be prepared to either go through that, to weather that ourselves, i.e., putting in showers or having generators, having people that are trained and ready. Then much like you would do um, when a snowstorm is on the way, how do you prepare your home for that? How do you prepare your church for that? And this is just on a larger scale for hurricanes and stuff. And then the relief area, which is where we are now, and starting in some places even to nudge into the recovery as more longer term teams are making their way into the process to start rebuilding. Now, there's obviously a lot of relief still going on. I was up in Spruce Pine yesterday talking with a pastor there, and there are people still without power. There are people still in the valleys and the gullies and the hollers and whatnot that have to get out by ATV. In fact, above my in-laws' house in Spruce Pine, or when you drive up their their um their dead end road that goes about two miles up into the mountain there, at the base of their yard of the hill there are a couple of cars that are parked because there's a road that comes off of their right at the front of their property that goes back into the woods and up the mountain eventually. But nobody, the 20 or 30 homes up there, none of them can get out because that road's not passable. And so they can't drive out. And so the cars that are at the bottom of the hill are because they were out of town during this and came back. And so somebody brought an ATV down is how they get up and back every day. So it's just so some of those folks are still in the relief stages, and then the recovery will be a long, long path. And then after that, you get to resilience, where you build up the community's stamina to withstand future storms, maybe not storms that are the same, but you're able to withstand other storms. You put things in place to help. You put systems in place or programs in place to help the more vulnerable people. You take care of one another and help each other to possibly be ready for what might come ahead. So,
It was interesting when you were showing the chart, I could track like to the day where we have been and where we are. So I almost put a little "You are here" sticker right at the crest at the top.
mhm. Hmm.
And I could
Hmm.
feel like, oh, that's where I was yesterday. And
Hmm.
now here's where I am today. And what you were describing up until that point, we have felt all that great community cohesion and the working together and the neighbors helping neighbors and just the energy that comes from that. It's really been amazing. But it's
Hmm.
interesting to kind of hear what the next stages will be like. So as our church tries to tend to people's needs, how can we be a good help to our community in Weaverville, but also Buncombe County, West North Carolina, for each of the stages of the aftermath? What can our church do to be a good help in the steps ahead?
Okay. To do this, I think of a lesson that I told you that that I'm an EMT as well. And one of the things that we talk about in that training is first you need to take care of yourself, then you take care of your partner, and only then can you help any kind of victim. You're not in a place to do that if you or your par if you're not able to, if you're not well or if you're injured or whatnot, then your team doesn't exist. And if you're okay, but your partner's not, your team doesn't exist. And then you can help any kind of victim. And so extrapolated that out to this work is you take care of you. I know I've shared this with you when I saw you, but I encourage you, and I want to encourage each of you to please take time, no, make time each day for your mental and spiritual health. This is a long and tiring road. You will get burned out. You will get tired. So please, please, I can't emphasize this enough. Take care of you, take care of you, take care of you. You may think you're being selfish. You're not. You are looking after your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit. And so you've got to take care of that to be able to do the work. Jesus went away to pray for strength. And if Jesus can needs to step away for strength for the work, for the journey, then by how much more so do we need to? And so do a little something for yourself, even if it's like um indulging in a book or catching a favorite TV show, or any little thing that just fills your cup back up because you're going to be pouring that out and pouring that out and pouring that out, and you've got to keep that filled. And so take care of you. And taking care of you also means taking care of your family, making sure your family is okay. And that includes stepping out and making sure that your church family is okay, that they can do the work. And then you can help with the folks in the community. Um, and so that's um basically one way to be, or that's the primary lesson that I would have for how to be helpful to at each stage is to just simply take care of you, and then recognizing again where you are on this chart as you go through, recognizing, oh, we're in this difficult section, and being cognizant of that, being aware of that can help. Um, you're wondering, why are they so irritable? Why are they so, it's we all are. We're all feeling this. We're all carrying this grief together. We're all carrying this burden um, together. Scripture tells us to bear one another's burdens and to carry one another's through times of difficulty. And so you're doing that. You're carrying that weight, but it's distributed among all of you because you all feel it in some way. So you carry that. You take care of you, and then you can take on the burdens and the problems of the community um, as you work through those various stages. Also, as you're going through, take breaks. Um, again, make time for yourself, and then celebrate the victories. Be intentional about honoring the work that you've done. Um, Celebrate even accomplishments. I mean, heck, 500 showers. That's a beautiful. That's a beautiful thing. Um, my church, we couldn't do the labor and the work, but we celebrated the teams that came by, we were hospitable to them and we took care of them and we celebrated with each group and listened to their stories of what they were able to accomplish. And the only reason they were able to accomplish it is because they had a place to lay their head and they had showers. They had a place, they had a temporary home while they were doing this work. And so celebrate each of those little milestones intentionally. Make a great big deal out of it. And that'll help in those deeper valleys to give a climb up, a little bit of a hope, a little bit of hope there. Also, don't try to do everything. Um, this is a massive thing, and they say, how do you eat an elephant with a fork? No, one bite at a time. And so you take one step, you find what you can do, um, and you do that one, two, or three things. Well, you recognize this is a large problem. But I'm reminded of the words of the Apostle Paul when he talks about how each of us are members of one body, but we have different functions. There's a group that's going to do all of the rebuilding. There's a group that's going to do provide the water. There's a group folks that are going to do various things. You don't want a whole bunch of hands. You don't want a whole bunch of feet. You definitely don't want a whole bunch of mouths um, during all of this. But but finding your niche, finding what you are good at, or what God has called you in your own context to do and do that well.
Hmm. That's really neat. It makes me look forward to our church thinking about what that will be for us. And we don't know what that will be because this is the farthest we've gotten in this process, but
Hmm.
I'll be excited to see what we figure out as our next step.
Hmm.
I before we jumped on the Zoom call, I gave you there was maybe like three or three and a half other questions that I was thinking about getting your thoughts on, and I say you jump first and hit those in whatever order is best, whichever one you thought would be worth spending first time on. I want to make sure we cover the most important things or the best advice that you have to share before we run out of time. So I
Okay.
would say of those three and a half questions left, just pick the best one first, and then we'll go down the list for as long as we've got time.
Okay. Um, let's see, looking at it over here. Been busy trying, doing a lot of wonderful things these last 2 weeks, but the amount of need and the type of needs won't last forever. So, what would a good new normal look like for a church going forward? That's contextual. What your church, again, your niche and what you're doing, what role you're doing, but finding healthy ways to do that where you're not overextending yourself, where you've got maybe you have you're doing hospitality or something for teams that stay, but it's not the same people doing that. You've got some level of rotation in that where maybe a Sunday school class adopts this month or this week, and then another a Sunday school class adopts the next one, so that your people, while keeping doing the work of the church in the church, are also able to do something on toward the recovery without feeling burnt out, or while not feeling taken advantage of, where they're able to give some, and then they're able to renew, and then they can go back in. So develop some um of rotation there. Also in that going forward is to keep this in front of you. We in my context, we were inundated with supplies. Um, I saw your church, but I've also seen some other churches that were given a lot more. And it's crazy. And some of the things that we were given were some of the things that we did not need, nor did we want, nor did we ask for, but we were given them. And so some of those supplies, especially the bottled water, we've got partners here like the Robeson County Church and Community Center, from whom we borrowed. I called my friend who is the director there, and she asked about the shower trail, and she's like, "Oh, by all means." And so I was like, "Great." But some of the cleaning supplies and the hygiene products and whatnot, we donated to them to distribute because we do have folks that are living in poverty that those things will be needed even if we didn't have a storm. But the water, I had like probably two full pallets still left at this point, and I just left it there because I wanted people to come in because while um the four or five families that were impacted here with loss and either having to rebuild or to well they rebuilt after the first storm, everybody, all six of them did. But after the second one, only two of them did. The other ones moved, either moved away from Lumberton or they moved to higher ground in Lumberton, moved to a new house. So that
Yeah, we definitely have a lot of bottles of water. We now have a food
what was
pantry.
that? You're breaking up a little bit.
Oh, sorry. I'm putting my laptop closer to the window so it can get the temporary Starlink satellite internet. So yeah, we have a lot of bottles of water, which has been great, and we still have a lot more. We now have a food pantry that we didn't have 3 weeks ago, and it is well stocked, very well organized, and it is great, and it looks great. So that's going to be a new thing that we weren't used to
Mhm.
managing and having as a ministry. So that's going to be part of whatever the new normal is like for us.
Mhm. But with that, I kept that there because because my church was wanting to default real quickly back to normal, back to normal, back to normal, even though there were whole neighborhoods. Part of it is a racial thing, but part of it is just my folks were needing some sense of normalcy and they wanted all the reminders that the storm, because the storm had passed for them, they were okay. But I left the water there almost as a symbol to say there are still people that are rebuilding, and this is a long process. And then after the second hurricane, so much more so that this is still an issue. We had I mean, teams that had come in and done muck outs and had put in new floors were having to put in new floors to the same homes to do that process literally in the same place that they just were a couple of weeks before that. So it's a mess, but trying to keep that in front of your people as a reminder that this, while Weaverville may be okay, there are sections of Western North Carolina for whom this is going to be a significantly longer rebuild. There may be sections of Western North Carolina for whom this is not going to take all that long. Maybe they had very little damage, very little flooding relatively, but places like Blowing Rock and Lake Lure area, or Swannanoa, or Spruce Pine, or Burnsville, and those places, it's going to take a bit longer. So just keeping that reminder in front of um of everybody.
Okay. 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 Well, what about other things like as we are looking ahead um, for ourselves, what, how can we um, take the lessons and the blessings that we have received during this time? How can we take those with us so that we are changed and we don't revert back? How can we help our town do that? We've made a lot of great connections with people that our church didn't know before, people who had never been inside our
Mhm.
church, people who likely would have never come inside our church. So there's new connections and new blessings that have been happening. So what's a good way to keep that in mind and build on the goodness instead of just going back to same old?
If you figure that out, let me know.
Okay.
Because I think as we talked about before we started recording, we were talking about this when I said I remember how patriotic everyone was after 9/11 and how short-lived that was. I remember now just a few years ago when we were in the depth of COVID, and while the pandemic is still out there and it's still very seriously, we want to default. We want that sense of normalcy. We crave it, and we'll do everything we can to get back to it. And so it takes intentionality. It takes um mindfulness. It takes a willingness to do that, a willingness to be uncomfortable and to recognize that this can't go on. We can't go on living like we were. We should be more like Jesus and being out in this. And then continue those relationships that you have, be intentional about continuing to cultivate those, reaching out to those folks, that those new friendships, those new partnerships you have. And don't let them die away. Intentionality is key in that. Just continuing to be friends, to talk to them, to say hey on the street. Um, to It's difficult when friendship can be can become one-sided and one person is doing all the work. But for the church, I think that's part of what we're called to, in some sense, called to do. We're called to continue to try to do that. And then if it's reciprocated, great. If it's not, um, we may continue to work on that or go as God leads us in that. It's just know that this is a long ordeal. And like I showed you on that chart earlier, your high at the end or after that period has passed is higher than it was prior to because of that richness of the community of the common struggle that you guys have gone through and survived and hopefully thrived. You've got these new partnerships. Just continue to build on those, continue to work with those, and again to celebrate what you guys have done. So maybe that anniversaries are not seasons of grief, but of celebration. Like, hey, a year ago, don't maybe celebrate the day it happened, or don't do it on the day it happened, do it the day after and celebrate. This is when everybody came in and everybody helped. All hope was lost, but people showed up. I'm reminded of one of my favorite theologians, Mr. Fred Rogers, who talked about in disaster, and when bad things, why do bad things happen? Well, look for the helpers, he said. Be the helpers and look for those that are helping around you. Um, that's where God is. God is being one of the helpers and seeing the face of God in the helpers and in the folks that you're helping.
Yeah, yeah, those are good words. Um, it sounds like we have a lot of discernment to do
Mhm.
going
Mhm.
forward. I was hoping you would give me an easy answer sheet with 5 bullet points of exactly specifically what we should do. So a little disappointed, but that's okay.
I wasn't given that. I wasn't given that at the start of mine, so I had to build that on my own. And but that again, this isn't a cookie cutter thing. Just like systems are different from what you guys have had, and my church is different from yours. Our contexts are different, and while the skeleton may be the same, the outlook, the what it looks like on the outside, and what the response is different. You've got different resources than I do, so that it'll look different. Um, so it unlike how some churches try to copy what other churches do, but they don't translate it for context. They just go, "Oh, this succeeded here. I'm going to bring that there." That's not what they taught us in seminary to do. They taught us to read the scripture for ourselves, to apply the scripture to our own unique context, and let that be spoken into our own unique context to find what God is doing, wants to do in our context and doing that. So if I gave you the 5 bullet points that worked here in Lumberton, I would be doing you a disservice.
Well, that sounds both challenging and exciting. So I'm glad to say that our good church is up for that challenge.
I think so.
So in the closing minutes, uh, is there something that I should have asked you about that I didn't know? Any kind of parting wisdom for us? Anything that we should keep in mind that wouldn't have occurred to us to ask?
Um, Continue to be who you are. I'll come back. I'll circle back a little bit. First of all, let me just say, when I drove up, or when we rode up to Weaverville and I saw your sign out front, I was like, man, this is Stewart's church. This sucks. I'm like, be yourself in all of this. Don't try to be who God didn't want you to be, and that brought me great joy to know. I mean, I was like, he hasn't lost his sense of humor. He is still very much the Stuart that I remember, and so no, there may be some questions that you guys might have, but this is the fact that you are wanting to have this kind of conversation that speaks volumes. Um, it's nice to know that now when CBF or when we try to come forward with disaster stuff, until you've lived through this, um, I could be at at an annual gathering or a general assembly, and there's a handful of folks that care about disaster. Most of them have been through one or have come from a first responder world or something like that. But this has impacted more people, so more people will be naturally interested in it, and so that can't be but a good thing. Not that you guys have gone through it, but that there'll be more folks that are wanting to learn more and to do more. So continue asking questions. I stand ready to help out in any way that y'all can. We can do this periodically if you've got some other questions. If you folks, as you're watching this, come up with some stuff and go, and you've got some other questions, give them to Stuart, send them to me, and I'll be glad to help out with that in any way that we can.
Great. I really appreciate that. Every day is a day that we have not faced before. So the next stages for us are new territory, but we know that God is with us. And I have been and continue to be very proud of this church and this congregation. So I know that we're up for the challenge, but it's really good to know that we've got good people on our team and in our corner, like you, who I've got on speed dial, and I can email or text or call when those unknown questions come up, and we got to figure it out. So thank
Right.
you very much for this conversation, and I know that you've got Wednesday church stuff to
Mhm.
do, so I will let you go. But I really appreciate it, and whenever you need that shower trailer back, and we need to send it on to another good spot, let us know. But we really thank you for that blessing and for all the help. And we hope to see you in the Weaverville area soon.
Hope so. Take care, my friend. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.